an example of a person who fears man more than he fears God. He's prepared to do this right under the nose of God, so to speak, right in clear vision of all the malach. They're all going to watch, see what's going over here. His biggest concern is that nobody from his congregation, from his tzibur, should see. And that's a lot of us. There's a lot of us doing things in everyday life that seem to indicate that we have more fear of man than we have fear of God. Well, God will forgive me. Man won't, but God will forgive me. He knows me. He knows me better than my neighbor does. My neighbor will move or kick me out or not let his kids play with my children because he doesn't understand. He won't investigate. He's got the gears, he's biased, but God understands where I'm coming from. That's true. There's no question about that. But there's more to it than that. There's also rationalization, what the Gemara calls mori heter. A person finds a justification for doing what he's doing, even though it's not what God would agree to. Or would like to believe that God would agree to it. Aren't you afraid of what's going to happen at the end of days, on the day of judgment, when life catches up to you? We're all in the same boat. And that's what cheshbon hanefesh is all about. A daily accounting of one's soul. That was a joke. A few weeks ago, I heard a story, a remarkable story, a true story, I was told. Every detail of the story is supposed to be true, and why not, okay? The story is of a Rebbe who was teaching a class, a cheder of children, and as is often the case, unfortunately, one of the children was one of those kids who couldn't sit still, couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate, and not just that, it wasn't like he was drifting off and not paying attention, but he was one of these children who couldn't sit still in one spot. And so therefore was constantly getting up and constantly running around and constantly saying things and constantly doing this and constantly doing that. So it got to the point where the Rebbe could no longer teach the rest of the class. He couldn't, that was impossible. The child was mafriya everything, was bothering everything. And this went on for days and this went on for weeks till eventually the Rebbe said, enough is enough. This child has to be dealt with. And the Rebbe called up the parents and called the parents in. The parents came in and sat down with the Rebbe, and he says, look, nothing, no offense to your child or to your family, whatever, but your child, he doesn't sit still, and he doesn't focus, he doesn't concentrate, doesn't pay attention, and worst of all is he disrupts the class to such an extent that I can't teach. You have to do something for your child. And the parents, we don't understand. At home, he pays attention. At home, he's focused. At home, we don't. You're talking about our son? Absolutely. Well, whether you realize it or you don't realize it, this child cannot stay in my class the way he is. You have to go get Ritalin and give your child Ritalin, true story, to calm your child, at least calm your child down. Whether he learns or not is another story, but at least to quieten him for the rest of the class. So the parents said, we don't have much money. Ritalin is expensive. We can't afford to buy it. It's not subsidized. So the Rebbe said, look, I'm sorry, but that's what has to happen. I cannot sacrifice the rest of the class for your son. You have to find a way to come up with the money to pay for the Ritalin, otherwise your child has to leave the class. So the parents said, okay, we'll do that. We'll find a way, we'll borrow whatever the case may be. We will, in fact, get the Ritalin, but you have to do us a favor. Both of us work. Both of us leave the house quite early. We cannot give our child the medicine on time so that it's activated, for the class. It'll be too early in the day. So you do us a favor. You be the one to administer the medicine to our child, but in a way that's not going to embarrass him in front of his peers, the rest of the class. So the Rebbe, of course, said, no problem. I'll do that. That's not a problem, right? So the Rebbe did exactly that, right? Every morning they would come and sit down, and the Rebbe would turn to the boy and say, look, whatever, would you mind doing me a favor and going to the teacher's room and making me a cup of coffee? And the instructions were to take a little pill out from the jar, right? And he would do this. Every morning he would get up, the Rebbe would say that, the child would go, and he would make the cup of coffee for the Rebbe, come back, and that was that's the way it went for weeks. Finally, the father turns to the son and says, no, how's it going? Is there an improvement in the relationship with you and the Rebbe and being in class? And the son says, everything is wonderful. Baruch Hashem, everything is working perfectly. So the father is overjoyed. What a good investment it was for them to do with their son, right? And so he says, tell me, how does the Rebbe ask you to do it? So the son says, well, every morning we come in, we sit down, and the Rebbe turns to me, and it feels very special he does this, and he says, would you mind making me a cup of coffee? So I go to the coffee room, I take out, make a cup of coffee, I take one of the pills from the jar, and dissolve it in the coffee. And the father says, what? He says, well, that's what I'm supposed to do, right? And the father, is totally shocked and surprised. And he goes to the Rebbe and he says, what's been going on is not what you think. My son has not been taking the Ritalin. My son has been taking the Ritalin and putting it into your coffee and dissolving it. You have been taking the Ritalin. And the class has improved. And the Rebbe at that point realized, talk about embarrassment, but the Rebbe realized at that moment in time that the boy was not the whole problem. The boy was only part of the problem. The Rebbe was too uptight, and therefore it annoyed him too much. At that point in time, the Rebbe apologized to the parents and said, I'm sorry. I thought it was your son only, but I see the problem is also for me as well. And he apologized. So there are two levels of fear of God. There's a fear of God where you're simply afraid of punishment. If I do the wrong thing, I'm gonna get punished. I do the right thing, I'll be rewarded. That's like children. I don't buy into the right thing or the wrong thing the person's basically saying. Otherwise, what would I be afraid of? I'm afraid of the consequences. But if it wasn't for God, and it wasn't the consequence, and there was a way to rationalize and get out of it, I would do it. And you know something? We become our own worst enemy as a result. We blame other people for things that we're responsible for. We do things that are not reputable, we shouldn't be doing. We cheat, we steal, we do all, but in the name of emes, of truth. Kilu, we're okay. But God keeps track. He does a cheshbon nefesh for us. There's Yom Adin. But tzaddik is somebody who sees the world the way that God sees the world. That's the word lirot, to see. And the reason why he doesn't do a chet, a sin, is because he buys into the truth. He sees the truth as God sees the truth. For him, sin becomes insanity. And that's what the Gemara says. Ein adam chayte el shenichlas baruch shtus. A person does not do a chet, a sin, unless a spirit of insanity enters him. Well, there's all kinds of people doing averas who don't look so insane. Happy, right? But not insane. But they are insane. You know why? Because it's crazy. Would you throw money out the window? Would you burn a $100 bill? Would you cut off your own arm, God forbid? This is crazy. Why would you do it? It's not worth it. If, God forbid, there's an operation that's gangrene, but it's not. It's healthy. A healthy arm, healthy finger. You wouldn't do it because you can see how wasteful it is. That's a tzaddik. He sees the world the way God sees the world. And because he sees the world the way God sees the world, he's not somebody who's going to falsify the truth. He's not going to fake the truth just to protect himself because he knows it's wasteful. It's damaging. It undoes the good. He may suffer embarrassment in the short term, but in the long term, he's a bigger, better person for being honest, for being godlike. And that's what Moshe is saying in this week's parsha. Moshe is saying, look, folks, okay, if you're going to be selfish and self-centered, and you're only going to be interested in material pursuits in this world, and to have your name aggrandized, that's what you're after, then every single mitzvah is going to be a burden. You will feel the totality of Taryag mitzvahs. 613 mitzvahs. It's going to be a burden to you. And you'll look for ways to get out of them. And we did, and we have. And the majority of Jews today are assimilated because we did, in the end. And the ones who are from aren't quite doing exactly what they're supposed to do necessarily all the time either. Because we rationalize. That's the human condition. But, says Moshe, if you can simply align your intellectual perspective, if you can teach yourself through Torah to see the world as God sees the world, then you won't even notice the mitzvahs anymore. You know why? Because you'll buy into them. They'll be your perspective, your way of looking at life. And everything will become a labor of love, as it has for me, says Moshe Rabbeinu, and for the rest of you as well, if you approach it the same way.